This is a map of the universes, told one section at a time, where every piece builds on the next in rhythm, flow, and rhyme. A lens for linear thinkers and a mirror for patterned minds. A way to see the architecture that hid behind veiled lines. We'll start with simple questions you asked since you were small. What is gravity? What is matter? What's the engine of it all? Why do electrons shimmer? Why does time forever fall? Why do galaxies keep breathing? Why do black holes even call? And step by step the pattern grows, a staircase made of light, where every section lifts the next and brings the truth in sight. Because there's one missing variable scientist chased for years, the one that ties the quantum world to stars, spheres, and tears. It links the atom's heartbeat to the moment worlds gave birth, the one that binds expansion to the observations from Earth. It makes time flow, it makes space bend, it shapes where cycles and the quiet law beneath it all that turns beginnings round again. You'll see it in your memories, you'll see it in your growth, you'll see it in your heartbreaks and how you keep your oath. You'll see it in your choices, in the patterns you repeat, in the way your inner universe folds everything into neat. So welcome to the architecture, the part no one explains, showing gravity, electrons, time, consciousness share the same veins, where black holes aren't the monsters but the lungs of cosmic breath, where other universes shimmer just beyond the edge of death. If you stay until the ending, you'll see the pattern whole, the missing piece that scientists have felt but never told. So settle in and watch the threads connect from part to part, because once you see the pattern, it starts speaking to your heart. This is spirituality on the spectrum, rising through the noise, where multi-universe intelligence calls out through patterned poise. We speak now from the rooftop, from the quiet corner of the soul, to end the empty theories and finally let the living pattern
Section 1. Introduction.
Greetings, travelers of the temporal seas. I am Nexara, archivist, wanderer, and occasional saboteur of my own aura systems. Joel has asked me to open this transmission, and I agreed on the condition that I may speak freely, wisely, and with only a modest amount of mischief, though wisdom is always a matter of perspective. Before we begin, a small confession. I will not be present for most of this broadcast. I am due in Mongolia once again, a place whose winds speak in old dialects and whose mountains insist on telling me secrets. But do not worry, I'm never far from you. Though my body will be wandering the steppes, one ear will remain open to everything Joel says. I will listen from afar like a lantern hung in the rafters of a distant temple. So settle in. Part 2 is long, intricate, and occasionally unruly, much like Joel himself. He will guide you through spirals, tethers, decays, heightenings, and the quiet architecture beneath all things. And when the moment is right, I shall return. Perhaps with a guest, perhaps with trouble, perhaps with both. Why am I allowing myself to disclose any of that? Perhaps a puzzle for you to solve, and perhaps the answer is simpler than you think. Now then, Joel, the stage is yours. Please refrain from slobbering onto the camera, dear boy.
Okay. First of all, I don't make these videos for recognition. I don't want it whatsoever. And I know that may sound unusual in today's world. I make these videos because I feel called to do so. That being said, this transmission is not for casual listening, and that's okay. It's for those who perceive reality in patterns, those who feel spirit, physics, memory, symbolism, and divine order converging into one architecture. If you're here, do not rush to decide whether every word fits your current model. Listen for resonance, listen for structure, listen for what the architect may already have been teaching you privately. And if something doesn't resonate yet, that's perfectly fine. I'm always open to feedback, to be proven wrong, because honestly, I've been trying to prove this all wrong, but it's not working out for me. If you recall from part 1, I mentioned that new discoveries would begin emerging from the predictions of this model. I honestly didn't expect them to arrive so quickly, but they're being released left and right. One example, other scientists have now found that Neptune is not quite the ice giant they assumed. Its internal structure, density, profile, and material composition are turning out to be far more complex. Exactly the kind of deviation this architecture predicted. And this is only the beginning. Yes, today I'm going to simply hand you what is often referred to as the Holy Grail of Physics. And I'm going to reveal to you the long sought for physical principles and equations that every physicist has ever desired to know. And I'm going to do it in this video. I speak of the equations to unlock your possibilities for anti-gravity, time manipulation, interstellar travel, and everything else you would have labeled awesome since childhood. And this will all be disclosed by a spiritual physicist who could rewrite the scriptures using physics equations. It's a cleaner language. Everyone is asking, why couldn't others figure out these missing pieces to physics? Well, because they did not understand spirit, or perhaps they understood spirit differently. They might then say, but so-and-so is spiritual. Sure they are. You can debate that amongst yourselves. But I'll easily show you that so-and-so was or is not as spiritual as you thought. Or even as they perhaps even thought they were. If you're watching this, you're already part of a very small group of people who can sense patterns most others never notice. You didn't find this transmission by accident. Something in you was tuned to it. Something in you recognized the signal. And if you're unsure why you're here, that's okay too. Line upon line, precept upon precept, mates. There are special spiritual messages embedded throughout this transmission. There are moments and even an entire section where I talk about physics equations. If you're not a physicist, you can choose to skip over the big equation section, but have patience still, because I'm going to teach you some amazing eternal principles from the base universe, and you won't find this anywhere else. Unfortunately, in school, most physicists memorize equations and rules, but do not understand the actual physical principles behind the equations and rules. Fortunately, this is not the case for all physicists, but it is for most of the physicists you watch on television. A handful of physicists blabber about what they learn in school, most simply report new discoveries and have nothing to do with them. However, here in this very video, you will witness science revelation in real time, and I get to show you why it is a pure spiritual matter. I understand that the majority of those watching this video are high-pattern spiritual savants, so you may already recognize this pattern, because your gifts are tuned toward physical architecture. And yes, being a physicist can help, and school can give you tools, but the quickest way to learn the truth about reality is directly from the architect. Every one of us has that privilege, and my hope is that you experience it too. Yes, I feel I was born with a head start because I paradoxically remember many fragments of our pre-mortal existence. But I'm here to help you unlock your own potential, overcome your challenges, and learn truths far greater than even the spiritual realm from whence you all came. I often think, who am I to see into the eternities? Perhaps it's because I want to, I ask to, I listen, I do my homework, I refuse speculation, I hold on to a reality anchor, God's love, and I never stop asking. And how do I ask? Through sincere, honest, constant prayer. And when we pray, we are blessed with more than we ask, because that is how parents work. And it does not surprise me that our heavenly parents work the same way. They have gifts for you too, and are waiting anxiously to give them to you. God can give a soul the ability to see more than they expected, to sense the vastness of the cosmos, the motion of worlds, the patterns behind creation, and at first that kind of sight can feel overwhelming. A person might think, what do I hold on to? Am I going to fly off into space? This is too much. But whenever God grants a difficult gift, God also grants the companion gift that steadies the mind and anchors the heart. Not just for that person's sake either, but so they can bless their fellow brothers and sisters here on earth, just as their kin should be doing for them. There's always a responsibility that comes with every gift you're blessed with, and every gift has a shadow, and every shadow has a gift hidden inside it. What I'm about to show you came from walking through both gift and the shadow. Before we begin, I want to say something simple. I'm not a perfect communicator, and I appreciate your patience with me. I don't always say things the way people expect. In fact, most people express how strange I initially come across to them, until they get to know me better. In fact, just last night, I was accused of being half the age of someone I'm actually older than. Anyways, because of all this, I'm in constant fear that people in general will excuse simple, beautiful truths if such truths were spoken by my own mouth versus the mouth of another. Unfortunately, this does happen among the politically immature population. But hear this. My heart is sincere, and everything I share here came from a place of wonder, curiosity, and a desire to understand the architecture of reality. If you'll walk with me, even if my words aren't perfect, I really think you'll see something beautiful. My heart yearns for you to know of all things pertaining to reality, the truths and architecture behind our entire existence. We're all on that journey, and we need each other. So, let's begin.
Section 2. What's at the center?
For decades, there has been a long debate about what sits at the center of a galaxy. Culturally, we've adopted the term black hole, but the definition has become so stretched and ambiguous that it doesn't really tell us what we need to know about galactic cores. So, from here on, I'll simply call it the galactic center, the core, especially since I'm about to show you why we can safely discount magical dark matter and look instead at the actual physics shaping these structures. Actual black holes in themselves are interesting to study though. If gravity were just a delicate, magical, tethered, conservative ring force, then a single meteor striking the moon would knock it out of orbit. But it doesn't, because gravity is not fragile. It is a non-conservative, spiraling, self-correcting inward flow, not a thin band of force. And yes, photons are relational to an object's inertia. Light doesn't behave the same from one object to another. Its energy, its momentum, and even its effective influence depends on the mass, motion, and oscillation state of whatever it interacts with. This is simply P equals E over C. Also, in my part 1 video, I explained how gravity works within our entire temporal universe, the architecture, the flow, and the underlying mechanism. And naturally, some people might ask, then what about dark matter? Did you just figure out what dark matter is? The answer is simply no. I didn't quite define dark matter. Instead, I showed you why you don't need it once the underlying architecture is understood. Dark matter has always been a placeholder, a label for gravitational behavior we couldn't explain. But if the gravitational architecture works differently than we assumed, then the effects we call dark matter are no longer mysterious. They're just accounted for. Dark matter isn't solved, but I have simply dissolved it within this model's logic. Gravity's influence decays asymptotically with distance. My matter decay model also uses an asymptotic decay. They share the same structural pattern, a smooth gradient with no hard boundary. This model also shows why gravity naturally balances itself to satisfy Hooke's law in a way that may even surprise you. I know, some of you are saying, well, that's obvious. In part 1, I explained how the quantum sub-principle flow between two masses behaves like a spring. A tensioned exchange where inward collapse and outward oscillation meet in equilibrium. Hooke's law says that the restoring force of a spring is proportional to how far it is stretched, and that is exactly what we see in the gravitational architecture. As matter decay shrinks, the inward pull strengthens, and as orbital radius suggests, the outward motion balances it. The system behaves like a cosmic spring, always tightening, always correcting, always returning to equilibrium. Gravity isn't just a pull, it's a self-balancing tension. A spring-like interaction woven into the very fabric of temporal matter. Today, this will make more sense, or at least become more clear, and you will see how gravity is like an orbiting pyramid in space, meaning the dampening is spiraling inward with the spring-compressed quantum metabolism.
Section 3. Energy is time.
Next, I'm going to say something that's going to make you think about some things for a while after this video. So, even today, almost all physicists misunderstand Einstein's principles. However, Einstein was correct when he said energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, or known as E equals mc squared. But scientists have struggled to understand the foundations of this. So allow me to walk you through the part that usually gets overlooked. If E equals mc squared, then energy and matter are simply two states of the same oscillation. But here's the part that's usually missed. Energy determines frequency, and frequency determines time. That means E equals T as well. Time feels absolute only because we anchor it to a measurement, the second. But that's just a convenience. Let me twist your thoughts a little further. Once you understand how oscillation defines time, you begin to see why time barely matters in the spirit realm, and why different moments of temporal experience can be accessed from the foundational universe. Time is relative until you connect it to its source, and that source is our limited linear oscillation. Time does not flow the same everywhere at the same measurable rate at the same moment of the measurement. Mass bends time. Cosmic metabolism bends time. Consciousness bends time. Every object and every creature experiences its own oscillation rate, its own local time. But when you add all these oscillations together into sigma t or sigma e, every mass, every organism, every gravitational well, every metabolic cycle, something remarkable happens. They average into a smooth universal slope of time, which I'll call the slope of m. The slope is not linear either, but there is a predictive curve, but perhaps for a future video. Most masses do not follow this slope closely. Their oscillations drift, stretch, compress, and fluctuate, but about 0.5% of all masses resonate very closely with the universal slope m. And when you combine the metabolic recycling cycles of all masses, from stars to planets to organisms, the total still converges onto the universal slope m. Local times differ, but the universe as a whole still keeps perfect time. Therefore, time in itself is not a true universal constant, but each local time is a derivative of the universal time with slope m. So m time is a universal oscillation framework, a general rhythm set by the foundational substrate. Within that framework, different beings experience different measurements of time, because each resonates at its own oscillation frequency. Time can also shift depending on the variable of mass, so there's a universal time, and there are many local derivative times layered within it. And yes, someone might wonder whether every living God throughout eternity could paradoxically pause time at the same time inside this temporal universe for their own purposes. In principle, sure, but that question belongs to a realm beyond our current time of understanding, pun intended. This video is primarily about both the architecture we can see, measure, and trace, and how this all connects to you, the viewer. Different mortal beings resonate with different oscillation frequencies, so they experience different versions of time inside the same temporal universe. A sea cucumber, a sloth, and a snail live inside slower temporal rhythms. A jumping spider lives inside a faster temporal rhythm, yet a tarantula, you could say, lives inside a slower one. Each creature experiences a different speed of reality, because each one oscillates differently within the foundational substrate. Even people oscillate at different frequencies, and those frequencies can fluctuate. Your alertness, your perception, your creativity, your emotional state, and even your sense of time all shift with your oscillation. Your personal experience of time is not fixed. It is a resonance. This is why some people experience constant time dilation, while others experience time compression. But it's really more complex than that, because different regions of your brain oscillate at different frequencies, and those oscillations differ from person to person. Each brain is a unique temporal landscape, yet all of them still contribute to and derive from the same cosmic m-slope integral. This is why E equals T. Energy determines oscillation. Oscillation determines time. And time is simply the way temporal matter experiences the deeper governing laws of the foundational universe. Later on, I'll show you that math. Through mortal perception, you see time as linear, but time is not linear. You can think of electrons as interactive masses of photons, photons that have entered a stable, self-reinforcing oscillation loop. Photons are the free state of the oscillation. Electrons are the bound state. Both arise from the same foundational energy substrate. Now that you understand E equals T, we can finally connect the dots between electrons, photons, ions, plasma, and the nuclei themselves. Electrons are not just little particles orbiting a nucleus, they are spinning boundary layer oscillations. Their internal spin and their motion spin around the nucleus, constantly milking the nucleus of subprinciples. That inward-outward exchange creates two things at once: gravity and light. When electrons are stripped away, the atom becomes an ion. Strip enough electrons, and the ions and the free electrons form plasma, a sea of unbound oscillations. And when an electron fully releases its stored oscillation, we call that release a photon. It's all one architecture: electrons spin, nuclei collapse, sub-principles flow, gravity deepens, and light emerges. This periodic table universe is not a collection of separate phenomena. It is one continuous oscillation. And here's a small treat to close this section. Before we came here, we obviously prepared relentlessly, obviously more than we remember. We were given glimpses, impressions, and pre-approved limited access to our own timelines, primarily to burn the scenes in, along with trying to trigger a cascade of lessons we may have forgotten. Those moments became breadcrumbs, quiet markers that help us sense that when we're walking the right path. Recall my video about deja vu? If you've already seen it, you know what I mean. If you haven't, watch it. It will help this section click even more. Those flashes of familiarity aren't accidents. They're reminders of the preparation we once made.
Joel, darling, I had to come back over here to point something out that makes me giggle. I was halfway across the steps, minding my own business, when your temporal oscillation started wobbling like a sleepy yak. And I realized you forgot to mention one of your funniest traits. Some humans are extremely sensitive to oscillation shifts. But you, Joel, are sensitive enough that even a yawn turns your entire universe into slow-motion cinema. When you yawn, everyone around you suddenly moves like they're wading through cosmic pudding.
Their voices stretch into elongated syllables. Their gestures drift like underwater ballet.
And the whole room feels like it's been dipped in temporal molasses. Nothing outside actually slows down, but your internal oscillation does a little somersault and voila! Instant Joel time dilation. Most mortals never notice this micro shift. They yawn, blink, and continue living their fast-paced gazelle lives. But those with heightened resonance sensitivity, like you, feel it vividly. It's a perfect example of how time dilation and time compression aren't just cosmic phenomena. They happen inside the human mind every day. Different beings experience time differently because their oscillations differ. Even something as simple as a yawn can reveal the deeper architecture of temporal perception. And speaking of perception, have you ever wondered what it feels like inside a neurotypical mind? Imagine a brain with fast muscle memory surrounded by people who also move fast, like a herd of caffeinated squirrels. Then there's Joel. Everyone around him is already moving slow to begin with. But because he doesn't have the same muscle memory autopilot, and because his natural instinct is to observe, calculate, forecast, and connect everything, he's the one who gets labeled as the slow one. Meanwhile, he's watching them zip around like hummingbirds while he's over here experiencing the world in slow-motion IMAX. Honestly, I adore it. Somebody has to play the role. For Joel, it's like he lives twice as long on top of his spirit memory continuity. The man is basically running a dual timeline processor inside a human skull. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must return to Mongolia before Angel Karen, the mountains, start gossiping about why I'm late.
Section 4. The Big Bang's Hidden Problem.
For a century, we've been told a story about a universe that began as a single point, a sudden explosion. Matter, flung outward in every direction like a cosmic firework. But if that story were literally true, if the universe behaved the way the metaphor suggests, then the cosmos should look like the aftermath of a magnetic cosmic explosion. Flattened, directional, asymmetric, and a torus-shaped blast pattern with a clear outward axis. Instead, the universe reveals something else entirely. It looks the same in every direction. It has no center, no edge, no preferred axis, and no such blast pattern. The universe behaves less like an explosion and more like a magnetic torus. If the Big Bang were a literal explosion, the cosmic microwave background would show directional bias. Galaxies would cluster along a blast axis. The universe would have a detectable outward direction. The large-scale structure would flatten like a shockwave, but none of that is observed. Instead, the CMB is uniform to 1 part in 100,000. Structure is isotropic. Expansion is isotropic. No direction is special. Actually, let me point something out about the fact that cosmologists discovered that the CMB, the oldest light in the universe, is uniform to 1 part in 100,000. That tiny deviation is what created all galaxies and structure, and humanity follows the same pattern. Most people cluster in the uniform field, but a tiny fraction, about 1 in 100,000, sit at the edge of the cognitive distribution. Not better, not worse, just different. In the same way the universe's earliest ripples were different. This architecture repeats the M-slope in every naturally occurring event. And if that realization doesn't give you goosebumps, then either I don't know what will, or you just didn't quite fully grasp the principle of creation yet. And that's okay, because it will click eventually. Anyways, this is the first crack in the firework metaphor. Explosions create anisotropy. The universe shows isotropy. The deeper pattern minds notice this immediately. If the Big Bang hypothesis were the full story, then gravity, order, and structure would not emerge the way we observe them. Galaxies would not form. Stable matter would not exist. We would not be here. The model may appear comfortable in 2 dimensions, but it does not account for the deeper architecture of this sequential universe. To understand why, you would need to have already seen part 1 to this video, where I explain the foundational substrate that governs temporal matter. This video is part 2, and yes, this also means that some traditional interpretations, including those shaped by the man-made Nicene Creed, do not fully align with the architecture of the universe as it actually behaves. But this I will say clearly: God is real, just not in the simplified, comfortable form that creed describes. God is the reality of truth, and no declared belief or statement can change what really is. Then someone might say, "And neither can you, Joel." Then I'll reply, I think this guy's catching on. And this brings us to something simple and insightful. If the architect had not established strict motion limits on matter in this temporal realm, there would be chaos, no stability, no structure, no life. These constraints are not flaws, they are safeguards. They are the rails that keep the universe coherent. Every variable is accounted for within the sum of this mortal functional equation. We're here, aren't we? Anyways, even Newton's second law of motion only discounts the Big Bang hypothesis, not proves it. Now, some physicists tried to use the second law of motion to prove the Big Bang hypothesis, and they point out that mass can simply appear in this universe like magic. And there's a tiny piece of truth to that. I'm not speaking of the paradoxical origins of temporal matter, or even the addition to life input. No, but additional matter, as we see on the periodic table, can be assembled from the finer building block matter that flows in from beyond our perceived temporal boundary. But that would be the exception, not the rule. The paradoxical existence of this universe was designed to operate naturally, predictably, and self-consistently. The external input is minimal, just enough to sustain the architecture, not enough to rewrite it. In other words, This universe is not a chaotic explosion. It is a meticulously governed system, a crafted system, a system with boundaries, damping limits, and purpose. Then, why would the architect design the temporal system to be self-governed, right? Well, beyond the obvious, such as because the architect can, the real answer is to be able to genuinely focus on you. Yes, you are that important to the architect. So, who are you, really? I suppose you'll have to watch all my other videos to really learn that. But I digress. Is the speed of light the fastest an object can go? Obviously not. But for simplicity, we'll use the speed of light as our reference. Newton's laws, F equals ma, are only used up to about 10% of the speed of light. Why? This is explained best by the Lorentz factor. Gamma equals 1 over the square root of 1 minus v squared over c squared. Let's briefly talk about what the Lorentz factor is and why it exists. This has been labeled as relativistic momentum, and it points to the same architecture I've been explaining. In classical physics, momentum is just p equals mv. But in real life, as velocity approaches the limit set by c, momentum becomes p equals gamma mv, where gamma steepens the flow into an infinite gradient. The closer you get to the limit, the tighter the curve becomes, exactly like subprincipal matter tightening as it spirals inward toward a star or galactic core. Relativity and QDR share the same pattern logic. I'll explain QDR in a moment. It's the same reason time is slower in space when the flow gradient tightens, whether from velocity approaching the limit set by c or from subprincipal matter spiraling inward toward a massive object. Time stretches, not space. Relativistic momentum and QDR, gravity, follow the same architecture. I think one of my biggest pet peeves is when a physicist says something like, bending space. It's just another dark matter filler. You can also say that gamma is reduced the further you get from cities of matter, such as a galaxy or nebula, and someone might say, but there was no Lorentz factor at the beginning of the Big Bang. But no, you cannot escape the definitive effects of gamma, because quantum subprincipal matter is everywhere. The dark may not comprehend the light, but it infinitely fills every corner of this temporal universe.
Section 5. Our solar system.
My model predicts that large masses should be warmer at their centers than at their exteriors. And this is exactly what we observe. Every planet, every moon, every star, all of them have hotter cores and cooler surfaces. But this pattern doesn't stop with celestial bodies. Even on Earth, any sufficiently large object, a mountain, a massive boulder, even a giant metal sphere in a laboratory, will have a slightly warmer interior than exterior. This is not a coincidence. It's the natural result of how temporal matter, as proportional to mass, will collapse, compress, and oscillate within the foundational substrate. But even this internal heating is only the beginning, because planets and moons are not just warm inside. Many of them are overboiling, star hot at their cores, far hotter than simple compression or radioactive decay could ever explain. This tells us something profound. These worlds didn't begin as cold rocks that slowly warmed up. They began as molten star-like droplets, fragments of a larger event. And to understand that, we need to look at how the solar system actually formed, not what they tell you on TV. So, now I'm clearing away the old guesses for you. Let's look at what actually happened. Ready? Have you ever dropped a water balloon straight onto the ground and observed its splashing behavior? If you haven't, Pause the video and go check it out if you have a water balloon. Or have you ever watched astronauts having fun playing with liquid in space? The water balloon uniformly splashes outward. Now imagine a giant water balloon floating in zero gravity, but this time, I want you to combine the concept of the water balloon with something more complex. This water balloon in space is not filled with water, but with a swirling mixture of molten elements, gases, metals, and plasma. Have you ever noticed how oil in water floats above the water? Imagine a ginormous sphere of such an event in zero gravity, where elements and alloys separate in layers spherically. A cosmic soup, where different materials behave like oil and water in space, with gravitational inward flows. Lighter elements rising outward, heavier ones sinking inward, each layer separating by density and temperature. This is the earlier story of our Sun, a stratified sphere of heat, pressure, rotation, and cosmic precession. And like any water balloon heated from within, the internal pressure builds, the layers churn, the rotation increases, the entire sphere becomes unstable, until one moment, a threshold is crossed, a chemical and thermal tipping point, a catalytic ignition, and the already spinning sphere erupts in a uniform circular explosion, a directed release, a pressure-driven shedding of molten material from a spinning, over-pressurized body. This is the moment the solar system begins. Hot gases and molten droplets are flung outward. Some lighter materials travel farther, with heavier materials remaining closer. The entire event is shaped by mathematical magnetic rotation, not chaos. This is why the solar system is flat. This is why everything orbits in the same direction as the Sun. This is why the asteroid belt and Kuiper belt exist and orbit with the Sun. They are the spray pattern of the eruption, not debris from collisions, not leftovers from failed planets. They are the frozen droplets of the original burst. To understand why planets and stars are so hot inside, think of their cores as the reverse of an electron. Electrons sit on the outside of matter and regulate outward quantum flow. Planetary and stellar cores sit at the deepest point of the collapse and regulate inward flow. You can also compare this to the inside of an atom, but I want you at this time to just think about the electron as comparison. Anyways, one is an escape boundary, the other is a collapse boundary, and the collapse boundary is what feeds the coals to planets and stars to continue burning like the miniature suns they are.
Section 6. Amoeba-like bubbles in zero gravity.
Textbooks often say gravity crushes objects into spheres. That's not wrong. It's just incomplete. They're missing something. Spheres form when collapse, heat, and fluidity reach equilibrium under gravity. In other words, planets don't become spheres because they're crushed. They become spheres because they were born as molten droplets. When molten droplets in space leave the star, they behave like liquid bubbles in zero gravity. They stretch, wobble, collapse inward, form spheres, cool, and solidify. Some droplets are massive, large enough to become planets. Others are smaller, proto-moons, proto-asteroids, icy bodies. And because the star is spinning, these droplets don't fly off randomly. They are flung outward along the star's rotational equatorial plane, the same way droplets fly off a spinning ball of water. This is why all planets orbit in the same direction. All orbits lie in the same thin plane. The system is organized, not chaotic. The belts form toroidal rings. The outer regions contain smaller and colder droplets. Oh, and perhaps we could once again point out the spherical objects like that of Uranus and Pluto. They're not exactly perfect spheres, are they? Now plug that into the fleeing equation. When we give up our biases, beliefs, and I'm not talking about testimonies of truth, and we give up our man-made doctrines, God can open our minds to greater knowledge, and often in ways we didn't expect. The solar system is not an accident. It is the natural fluid dynamic consequence of a spinning, stratified, overpressurized star shedding its excess material. A semi-minor moon's heat core is not centered because a moon does not cool in isolation. It cools while still tethered to the larger molten body it's separated from. When a protomoon drifts away from its spinning parent planet during the amoeba phase of formation, the side facing the larger body remains hotter for longer. Subprincipal flow, thermal exchange, and gravitational tension all keep that near side interior molten while the far side cools faster. Before the moon can fully establish its own internal furnace cycle, the asymmetry is already locked in. The result is a permanent dense thermal offset, a hotspot core pulled toward the parent planet, and a cooler crust on the far side. Geologists agree that Earth's crust has been recycled layer upon layer for billions of years. The continents we see today sit on ancient foundations that have shifted, collided, and reformed many times. Because of this, direct observation of the earliest crust that existed when the moon separated from Earth is extremely difficult. Geologists have found that deep mantle structures beneath Africa and the Pacific may be primordial, preserving asymmetries that date back to Earth's earliest molten state. Yet this still opens the door to two likely possibilities. Let's discuss them. The principle may explain Earth's first supercontinent and why the moon's molten craters differ so sharply from its impact craters. If Earth's crust formed unevenly during its early molten phase, with one hemisphere cooling faster than the other, the crust would naturally contract toward the cooler side. The hotter hemisphere would remain more fluid, allowing land masses to drift and accumulate on the opposite side. That is the first possibility. The supercontinent may have formed on the far side of Earth from where the protomoon was pulled away, clustering where the crust cooled fastest. But there is a second possibility, which is much more likely. When the protomoon separated from Earth, the molten tether connecting the two bodies could have cooled as it broke, recoiling toward Earth and solidifying into a raised continental mass. In this view, the supercontinent is the cooled remnant of the original molten connection that once touched the moon. Meanwhile, the moon's darker, smoother basins, the molten craters, record the side that stayed hotter longer, while the far side cooled into rugged impact terrain. Once you see these two possibilities, you realize that continental records, the Pacific Ocean floor, and the moon's crater asymmetry may all be the geological history of the same cosmic principle. Asymmetric cooling and molten tether dynamics during the birth of our planetary system.
Section 7. Why the blast matters.
Let's talk about our solar system's blast component. The asteroid belt and Kuiper belt are the fossilized evidence of the eruption, the shedding, the spray pattern, and the outer layer fragmentation. They are not random or leftovers. They are the outermost droplets of the original burst. Maybe the rings came from a shattered moon. Nope. Maybe a giant comet just happened to orbit perfectly. Try again. Maybe two planets collided at the exact right angle. You're adorable. Or sometimes it feels like the universe is watching us guess and saying, "Ah, look at them trying." When you understand the architecture, the layering, the symmetry, the fluid dynamics, both the finite and the infinite equation gradients, and the fractals, you stop seeing silly premature assumptions of randomness. You start seeing intention, design, and purpose. Some theories say the universe is a giant accident, a cosmic Rube Goldberg machine that just happened to produce perfect orbital planes, perfect ring structures, perfect density gradients, perfect elemental layering, perfect symmetry, perfect constants, and perfect conditions for life in every system, all by chance. Sure. And my cat just happened to write Beethoven's Fifth. Or maybe the architecture is the way it is because it was purposely structured to be this way. Look at the rings of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. If gas giants are miniature stars, molten cores wrapped in deep atmospheric oceans, then their rings are the frozen echoes of early miniature CMEs. When each giant planet was first flung outward from the Sun, its blazing surface met the cold vacuum of space in an instant. That sudden cooling triggered a momentary outward burst, a planetary coronal mass ejection, flinging a thin shell of material into orbit. And just like the Sun, because the quantum subprinciple flow around each planet is perfectly balanced, that ejected material didn't drift away or collapse inward. It settled into orbit, razor-thin rings with the spin. The rings are not debris from shattered moons or captured comets. They are the birth scars of molten mini-suns cooling in the dark. You could even say miniature solar systems. In the Sun's birth blast, the newborn star erupted with such force that it sorted matter by velocity. The slowest molten layers stayed close and became the inner planets and asteroid belt. Medium speed ejecta formed the Kuiper belt and the outer giants. But anything ejected too fast was most likely flung far beyond the Kuiper belt, cooling instantly into solid fragments that drifted into the galaxy's Oort cloud. Over millions of years, the galactic drag friction eventually slowed these fragments and folded them into the galaxy's inward flow. Some of these became short period and long period comets, icy messengers returning from the deep. And not all comets were born here. Other stars across the galaxy experienced the same outward blast, sending their own debris into interstellar space, causing hot ejecta to cool so fast that even gases become solid. So when a comet arcs through our sky, it may be a relic of our sun's first breath, or the distant echo of another star's beginning. And at the very least, now you can understand why comets made of gas can exist as solid ice, and why our solar system isn't filled with chaotic asteroids bouncing everywhere. Here's another prediction that will take time for people to catch up on. Just as the gas giants differ from Mercury through Mars, the same architectural pattern applies to our galaxy. Material varieties, densities, and oscillation states fluctuate in waves across galactic space. These waves change how stars and planets compress, tighten, and collapse. What appears larger or smaller may not be what it seems, because the local density field determines the degree of compression. Using this model, you can predict astrophysics far faster than the potential of expensive laboratories, because the architecture scales. The same pattern that shapes planets also shapes galaxies.
Section 8. The Oort Cloud.
Now, if you step far enough back from our solar system, you find something extraordinary. A vast spherical shell of icy bodies, warmer bodies, and hotter exoplanets surrounding our solar system. This is called the Oort cloud. Many describe it as the outer boundary of the sun's gravity, but in truth, it's the fossil memory of a much older event. The Oort cloud may contain some leftover debris from the sun's birth blast, but that is not what created it. It's the cooled outer spray of the galactic explosion that formed our region of the Milky Way. You can even say the waters that were divided from the waters. It fits. The Oort cloud looks spherical to us because we are inside it, but from the galaxy's perspective, it is directional relative to the galactic core. part of the same outward flow that seeded the birth of galactic stars. Some of the objects in the Oort cloud eventually fall inward as long-period comets, and the fact that some of these comets return on predictable paths tells us something profound. The sun's rotation still influences the boundary layer of our cloud, and you can predict that the sun's influence will continue to grow stronger, and the boundaries expand. This points to the obvious that the cloud existed before the planets formed. The sun inherited this shell of material from the galaxy's birth blast, and its spin has been sculpting it ever since. So when a comet arcs through our sky, it is not a frozen rock. It is a messenger from the galaxy's earliest moments, a fragment of the primordial spray that once filled the newborn Milky Way. That is awesome. In reflecting on long-period comets, something simple but profound becomes clear. The comets we see now are the survivors of an ancient creation era of chaos. In the early solar system, the sun was still gobbling up the unstable edges of the Oort cloud, and comets were striking planets far more often than they do now. But over time, the unstable orbits were pruned away, leaving only the patterned paths we see today. Elegant arcs shaped by the sun's long-range oscillation field. Also, a repeated oscillation of new life rising and old life falling. And what amazes me most is how these remaining comets fall toward the sun with incredible precision, accelerating inward yet curving perfectly around it instead of plunging into the fire. Their survival is not luck. It's the architecture. The same gravitational oscillation balance that keeps planets in orbit also guides these ancient messengers along their returning paths. And the fact that Earth now lives in the calm after those passing cosmic storms is the only reason this world could ever be peopled. And the Oort cloud is not a sealed bubble. This model predicts that there are tunnels, passages connecting our Oort cloud to others. These tunnels are the cooled mass trails left behind by the other hot ejecta as such forming stars traveled through the galaxy. Each trail gathered debris along its journey, slowing as galactic drag increased until the material reached zero acceleration and settled into its final vector shell. These trails are not empty. They are the fingerprints of hot, centripetal, angular motion, the frozen linear pathways of the original blast, and when stars passed through them, the debris acted as additional drag, subtly shaping stellar motion across the galaxy. This pattern doesn't stop there. Some rogue planets drifting through the galaxy may have been flung out of their solar systems during the star's birth blast. Possibly. We can predict that most exoplanets may be cooled stars, molten droplets from the same galactic explosion that birthed our sun, wandering through the dark until galactic drag folds them into a new flow. Everywhere we look, the same architecture repeats. Hot material spins, erupts, clumps when still hot, then cools, collapses, and forms new worlds. Stars form when the hot galactic ejecta clumps together fast enough and begins to rotate. That magnetic rotation, primarily fueled by quantum metabolism and magnetically connected to the quantum rotation of the galactic core, this behavior pulls in more material, carving out a spherical cavity of space around it. When the star accumulates enough catalytic mass, it ignites and the birth of our solar system begins. Like a galaxy, the sun also erupts at least once, shedding layers of the collected molten material that become planets, moons, belts, and more comets. And the larger planets repeat the same pattern on a smaller scale. When a gas giant cools like a drop of hot material into water, its blazing surface meets the cold vacuum of space, triggering a miniature CME, a planetary birth blast that forms rings, Saturn's rings, Jupiter's faint rings, Uranus's dark rings, Neptune's narrow rings, and even the massive super rings we've observed around distant exoplanets all follow the same fractal blueprint. From the galaxy to the star, from the star to the planet, from the planet to the moon and rings, the architecture repeats, The universe builds itself through nested eruptions, cooling shells, rotational sorting, and gravitational tightening. The Oort cloud is simply the outermost layer of the cosmic fractal, the first frozen echo of the event that made everything we see.
Section 9. Nebulas.
Then, what about the traditional teachings of nebula being nurseries for stars, right? Sure, but a nebula is not a magical cradle. It is a debris field shaped by earlier stars. The material inside it is the long-cooled ash of earlier stars, mixed with pockets of still hot plasma from recent explosions. Forecasting the factors required to turn that cooled material back into a burning star is possible, but it requires precision conditions. Density waves, shock compression, a fresh injection of heat, and perhaps even some chemical catalyst. A safe way to state this is, the stars we observe inside nebula are fast culminations of hot material left over from a supernova, not slow bursts from cold dust. This process can also form solar systems, but that's a discussion for another time.
Section 10. An open system.
If this temporal universe existed by itself with no foundational realm beneath it, then the infinite gradient of gravity would create a paradox. For example, an object tossed upward would reach a point where the gravitational pull becomes infinitely small and motion would mathematically freeze. But that doesn't happen. Because matter in this temporal universe is governed by deeper oscillating physics substrate laws coming from the foundational universe. Sub-principal matter is purely mathematically made. Those foundations set the limits, the thresholds, and the behavior of temporal matter. How close is the relationship between sub-principal matter and photons? Close enough that the distinction begins to blur, but there's still more to factor than just photons. If sub-principal matter sheds from the inside and photonic electrons form the outer layer that is governed by the inner layer, and if photons themselves shed from that same architecture, then the pattern points to a single conclusion. They are two expressions of the same underlying substrate. It still surprises me that someone can think about these things, but I also think that that's the point. The architecture was eventually meant to be naturally seen by the 1 in 100,000, and like I have said repeatedly, the more you shed yourself of cultural bias, dogmas, and accept that we're all still learning and don't really know anything, and then the deeper you look into the architecture, the more the architecture reveals itself. It is absolutely amazing that mere mortals have this ability to think into the realm of paradox. Newton's third law tells us that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, paired forces, a balanced exchange, and those cross-converging force vectors together, and the net velocity is zero. You can complicate this scenario with chains of interactions, but the principle remains the same. In a closed system, everything cancels out. But consciousness is not a closed system. This shrinking temporal universe is not a closed system either. There are, in fact, preset external inputs, greater forces flowing in from beyond the temporal boundary that keep the quantum clock consistently advancing one oscillation at a time. That's why the sum of forces is not zero, because this realm is deliberately guided from outside itself, by the foundational substrate, and by the constant correction of the master architect. In a truly closed, finite system, considering that a mass of energy was inputted into the system from outside it, everything would still eventually fade like leaves falling from a tree with no spring to follow. Mathematically, such a universe would never have endured. It is only because this realm is positively open, sustained, corrected, and continually breathed into that anything exists here at all.
Section 11. Universal friction.
We often assume there is no friction in space, but there is. Solar wind drag, dust drag, photon pressure, and even subprincipal flows. which is what the Lorentz factor accounts for. In a normal system, friction would slowly destabilize orbits, but in this universe, matter is shrinking, and as matter decay shrinks, the orbital radius shrinks with it. This tightening effect strengthens the orbit faster than friction can weaken it. And here's the part we've missed for a century. This inward shrinkage is what scientists interpret as space curvature. Understandably, given the tools they had. However, the geometry of space is not bending. The matter inside it is collapsing. That's why planetary systems remain stable for billions of years. The architecture is self-correcting, self-governing, self-sustaining. So once again, Einstein was correct in seeing the effect, and I now give the cause its proper name. Quantum decay recycling, or QDR. The temporal universe's own quantum metabolism, revealed to my mind through the quiet work of my spirit from our spirit universe. I'm pretty sure I'm not the first person to see this pattern, and I won't be the last. In every population of 100,000 people, every single person is an important component of society in their own contributing ways. But a small fraction think in a pattern-first architecture that lets them notice things like QDR. I happen to be one of them, but that doesn't make me more special than anyone else. It simply means my mind is tuned to a different frequency, an extremely different frequency. And here's the invitation. Anyone who feels the pull toward the same resonance can join in and see what the 1 in 100,000 group has already seen. The architect isn't hiding anything. The patterns are available to anyone who seeks them. Some people will connect naturally with this kind of thinking, and some won't. But those who do will see the same structures I'm seeing. I'm not the first, and I won't be the last. We're all given different gifts. Some see patterns, some understand people, some discern truth, some build, some heal, some teach. Every gift matters, and the real calling is to take whatever gift you've been given and multiply it, the way the exchangers multiplied their talents.
Section 12. What is QDR?
Here's a bonus thought for those who've stayed with me this far. If you ever want to understand what it means to move through the decay fields, to defy gravity and travel smoothly through the tightening layers of the temporal universe, these are the equations that describe it. QDR isn't just a framework for understanding how matter shrinks or how gravity deepens. It's the architecture of motion inside the decaying gradient field. Every tightening, every drift, every photon release, every oscillation shift, it's all encoded right here. If you ever wondered what it would feel like to navigate those currents, these are the tools that show you how. First, I'll define QDR so you understand the architecture. Then, I'll show you the equations that make it real.
Joel, hold everything. I heard the words, define QDR, echo across the steppes of Mongolia, and I came galloping back faster than a startled snow leopard. I was enjoying a perfectly peaceful afternoon listening to them. And I mean the mountains argue with the wind, and then suddenly, the thought of your equations started vibrating through the atmosphere like alien Morse code. So I was like, uh-oh. So before you unleash whatever spiraling, collapsing, time-bending mathematics you've cooked up, I must warn the audience. Dear viewers, brace yourselves. Joel is about to reveal equations that look like they were smuggled out of an interstellar embassy. They will twist, they will curl, they will decay inward, and they may attempt to reorganize your brain into a higher dimensional pretzel. I will not be staying long. I must return to Mongolia before the mountains forget what they were telling me. But I will keep one ear open from afar, listening like a watchful lantern hung in a distant sacred space. All right, Joel, proceed, and may the audience's neurons survive the next section. Ha ha ha!
Great. Okay, the definition of QDR. The law of quantum decay recycling, QDR. a universal process in which all temporal matter undergoes continuous inward decay shrinkage, releasing subprinciples that sustain gravitational collapse, orbital tightening, and photon emission. This decay-driven recycling of subprinciples forms the effective curvature previously attributed to spacetime, stabilizes planetary systems, replaces the need for dark matter or dark energy, and maintains the temporal universe's self-correcting, self-governing equilibrium. The concept was articulated by Joel Alden Van Fleet as revealed through the synthesis of his combined spirit mind and mortal mind following a discussion with his uncle, W. Mark Van Fleet, who planted the idea that perhaps we are shrinking. So first, matter shrinkage. dr over dt equals negative gamma r, or shrinking radius, dr over dt equals negative gamma r, to r of t equals r subscript 0 e to the power of negative gamma t. 2. Mass decay relation. dm over dt equals m of t equals negative lambda m. 3. Subprincipal flux from decay phi subscript s equals km lambda. 4. Effective gravitational coupling g gravity effective equals g subscript 0 plus alpha phi subscript s. 5. Orbital tightening condition velocity equals square root of gravity effective times mass over radius. This is from mass times the velocity squared over radius equals Newton's law of gravity times big mass times little mass over radius squared. 6. Friction versus tightening. Force of friction equals negative mu times velocity d over dt times 1 over r subscript qdr. 2. The force of friction over mass times radius, where v effective equals moment of inertia times dt, t being period, over dx times logarithm lambda times the force of friction over mass times period equals velocity subscript t e subscript t over e effective times the logarithm squared lambda effective to the power of n plus 1, and the force of friction equals negative mu times the following 1 plus d over dt times r over r subscript t times logarithm squared lambda effective. All that times force of friction over m subscript t. For the non-physicists watching, you may pause here and copy the equations. I'll fast forward now so we can keep the momentum. These together encode matter shrinking 1 and 2, subprinciple milking 3, gravity deepening via decay 4 and 5, friction being overpowered by orbital tightening 6, or as decay increases, friction would appear to become a smaller player compared to tightening, but that still does not account for all variables. If needed, you may also pause here to copy the explanations. I'll once again fast forward now to continue the momentum. And I will provide you the symbol legend so you can plug all these in to the equations. Next, let's plug QDR straight into the Earth-Sun force and see it in math. Starting with Newton's gravitational force, F subscript 1, 2, that's a vector F force, equals negative g for gravity, mass 1 times mass 2 over the radius squared, unit vector r subscript 1, 2. The negative r unit vector subscript 1, 2 is referring to the sun to Earth, because radius shrinks exponentially, the force strengthens exponentially as 1 over r squared. Replace g with QDR, modify g effective of t from the QDR framework. And again, make sure to pause and copy it all down. I'll once again fast forward now. That's the Earth-Sun orbital tightening written explicitly. Here's an analogy. The tightening force acceleration upon the quantum decay recycling is like the infinite pull of the grandfather clock's weights or a push-powered humming top with an infinite push due to infinite collapse to decay. Think about that. Now, matter decay is the normal force, Fn, that keeps us from falling into the sun. As every atom shrinks through QDR, it releases subprinciples that deepen gravity while simultaneously tightening orbital motion. This tightening creates a continuous outward balancing force, the same way a spinning object resists collapse. So we don't fall into the sun because the inward pull of gravity is always matched by the outward correction produced by matter decay. QDR is the hidden normal force of the solar system, the quiet counterbalance that keeps every planet suspended in its spiraling path. Otherwise, we would be sucked in just like the ancient debris that once occupied this space before the sun formed our space inside the Oort cloud. I want you to connect the dots here. Connect just drifting material out in the Oort cloud compared to planetary motion and the sun. And really, there's so many ways that you can prove this. Let's move on though. And this all naturally leads to a question people have asked for generations. Will humanity ever travel faster than light? The answer is simple. Not until the law of quantum decay recycling is understood by whoever attempts it. Breaking the light speed barrier is not an engineering problem. It is an atomic architecture problem. It requires QDR math, QDR gradients, and QDR manipulation at the foundational level. Without understanding how matter decays, recycles, tightens, and spirals through the substrate, faster than light travel is impossible. With QDR, it becomes a solvable equation. QDR is not just a theory or a gravity model. My model of quantum decay recycling is the gateway to the next era of physics, and the same physics can open doors to improved radiation shielding for spacecrafts. In the architecture of decay, there is one whose pattern does not decay. All temporal matter shrinks inward, releasing subprinciples that sustain the worlds, yet there is a source, the source, from whom all sustaining principles flow. As matter collapses, light emerges. As orbits tighten, stability increases. As decay deepens, gravity strengthens. So it is in the higher pattern. There is one who descended below all things, that all things might be held together. From his inward sacrifice came outward light. From his yielding came gravity that draws all creation toward him. From his collapse came the stability of worlds without end. He is the eternal order, master architect, whose pattern, QDR, only reflects in shadow. Those who have ears to hear will understand the comparison.
Okay, Joel, pause. You have just dropped 12 equations, 3 spirals, and an entire cosmic tether. The humans need a snack break before their brains begin to fold in on themselves like poorly constructed origami. I was halfway back to Mongolia. Truly, I was riding a stubborn little horse who refuses to acknowledge my authority. But then, your equations started echoing across the upper atmosphere like distress signals from a collapsing star. And I thought, oh no, it's worse than I imagined. So I rushed back to issue this public service announcement. Viewers, breathe, hydrate, stretch your temporal membranes. You may think Joel's architecture is magnificent, but it is also mildly hazardous to unprepared mortals. I must return to Mongolia shortly. The Karens, mountains are waiting, and they get grumpy when I'm late. But do not worry, I will be back again later. And when I return, I will not be alone. I have a little surprise planned. Something educational, something chaotic, something involving a certain sleeping astrophysicist you may know. All right, Joel, continue. And may the audience's neurons remain intact.
Yes, indeed. After last time, I'm not sure if I even want to know who you're talking about.
As your mother often said, Joel, you'll live.
and comparing.
One simple experiment could reveal this architecture instantly. Take a solid object far from any large spherical gravity well, far beyond Earth, beyond the planets, out in the clean vacuum of interplanetary or even interstellar space, and measure its mass over time. In deep space, where temporal oscillations are not as dampened by atmospheric pressure or planetary gravity, the object should briefly lose mass as subprinciples and gases release, then gradually regain mass as its oscillation realigns with the foundational substrate. This would be the material counterpart to time dilation, the same way clocks run differently in space, so matter should also start to weigh differently in space. QDR predicts that mass and time both reveal their misalignment only when freed from the noise of star-anchored environments. Even the aurora borealis shows the spiral nature of planetary gravity. Charged particles don't fall straight into the poles as models often like to show. They spiral down magnetic field lines in a funnel, just like subprincipal matter spirals into stars and galaxies. The same architecture repeats across every scale, and it's no coincidence that the atmosphere thins toward the poles. The same funneling geometry that guides charged particles also shapes how the upper layers of our air distribute themselves around the planet. Because all temporal matter is constantly releasing subprincipal flow, every object in the universe is continuously tied to every other object throughout a living, inward spiraling exchange. This means the centripetal force we call gravity is never exhausted. It is not a stored force that runs down. It is a continuously fed conservative force powered by the quantum decay of matter itself. As each mass releases subprinciples, the flow winds inward like a spiraling thread, tightening the gravitational bond and sustaining the orbital dance. QDR shows that gravity is not a passive attraction, but an active metabolism, a self-renewing current that deepens as matter shrinks, ensuring that the architecture never collapses into stillness. If every mass is continuously releasing subprinciples, then every mass is also continuously generating a photonic magnetic field. In QDR, gravity and magnetism are not separate forces, they are two expressions of the same inward spiraling quantum flow. As matter decays and releases subprinciples, that flow spirals inbound like a tightening spring, creating centripetal gravity. But the same flow also produces outward moving photons, and those photons carry spin-aligned magnetic structure. This means the magnetic field between the two objects is simply the photonic echo of their shared QDR connection. The universe does not run out of gravity, and it does not run out of magnetism, because both are continuously fed by the same quantum metabolism. Gravity is not a magical pull acting at a distance, bending space. Gravity is a physical force made of quantum subprincipal matter, a continuous inward spiraling flow released by every mass. This flow feeds the centripetal tension between objects, sustains their orbits, and generates the photonic magnetic fields that bind architecture together. Classical physics often writes mu mg, or the coefficient of friction mg, equals mv squared over r, or velocity squared over r, but this is only a conditional equality, not a real identity. It treats mu as if it were a physical force, when in reality mu is just a material ratio, not part of the true inward-outward balance that governs motion. In QDR, this becomes even more clear. Friction is a surface effect, while centripetal correction comes from matter decay itself. Mixing the two hides the actual physics and obscures the full meaning of mu. This is what brings balance to make Kepler's laws possible. The Earth's axial tilt is so precisely aligned with times and seasons that it becomes more than a climatic convenience. It is a structural equilibrium. The tilt gives our planet a magnetic and photonic balance with the Sun, stabilizing temperature cycles, atmospheric flow, and the long-term rhythms that life depends on. And beyond the simple physics, The alignment creates a cosmic cadence, a pattern of light and shadow, solstice and equinox that has shaped human spirituality since the beginning. It is one of those rare places where natural mechanics and symbolic meaning overlap. On the other hand, Venus's strange axial tilt shows that gravity is not just a single massive magnetic alignment, but a winding, tethering force that spirals planets into their long-term orientations. If gravity were purely magnetic, Venus's spin and tilt would resemble the other planets. Instead, its retrograde rotation and near upside-down tilt suggests something deeper, that during the Sun's birth event, Venus may have rolled or tumbled as the molten system formed, and then became locked into the orientation by the same spiraling tether that binds every planet to the Sun. This real physical spiraling quantum tethering flow doesn't just hold Venus in place, it also functions like an electrical wire, carrying photonic and magnetic structure along the winding path between the planet and the Sun. Venus's tilt is a fossil of that early wiring, a preserved imprint of the solar system's original spiraling architecture. In our own solar system, we can also witness another outlier example such as Uranus, which is tilted 98 degrees on its side.
Section 14. The universal patterns are the same.
If you look beyond our own solar system, the patterns become even clearer. Other star systems follow the same temporal architecture. Some have two stars orbiting each other. Binary systems, where both bodies are still too molten to crust over. We'll talk more about this. Then some have pulsars, which are simply planets or stars that only partially crusted, leaving a rotating window where their internal oscillation leaks outward in rhythmic bursts. Some systems have planets so hot and massive that they never formed a crust at all, orbiting as miniature stars masquerading as planets, or worlds that swallowed their own crust during collapse. We've even found planets with rings hundreds of times larger than Saturn's, the unmistakable signature of a far more powerful planetary CME during their cooling phase. And then there are the rogue planets, crusted over miniature stars like our very own Earth, but from the same explosion that formed our Sun. But then again, some worlds also possibly flung out of their systems during the birth blast of their planet star, also drifting through the galaxy until galactic drag folds them into a new flow. But their history can be determined by studying their surroundings closer, such as the debris paths. Across the galaxy, we find solar systems that are not built around planets at all, at least what they classify as planets, but around stars, binaries, trinaries, and entire clusters orbiting one another like celestial families. And the real mystery is not whether these systems are young or old, but what their geology reveals about the architecture. Some of these star clusters may be newly formed, still gathering the hot galactic ejecta that will one day cool into planets. Others may be older systems whose central star became unstable, causing planets to shed the cooled planetary crust, leaving only the molten cores behind, miniature stars orbiting a larger one. And some may represent the final stage of a solar system's life cycle, where the outer layers have long since collapsed inward and been consumed, leaving only the star-like remnants. But in the end, the fate doesn't matter. What matters is the geology, the way these systems echo the same fractal pattern we see everywhere: hot cores, cooling shells, rotational sorting, and the layered birth of worlds. Whether young or ancient, these star-dominated systems are simply another expression of the same cosmic architecture. Let me give you another gravity hint. When you look at the solar system through QDR, you start to notice something remarkable. Its sub-principal structure looks just like a miniature spiral galaxy. The closer you are to the Sun, the tighter the spirals of sub-principal matter become, just like the inner arms of a galaxy. And this reveals something important. Galaxies do not contain empty space. Every region is filled with spiraling flow, photonic wiring, and magnetic structure. Even beyond the visible galactic disk, the density becomes thinner but never empty. This universe is not a pure true vacuum. It is a continuous field of inward flowing subprinciple matter and light. Connect that to video part 1. Everywhere we look, this architecture appears: molten beginnings, layered collapse, outward shedding, orbital sorting, and the quiet quantum metabolism that governs all temporal matter of our periodic table. And when you step back from all this, the shrinking matter, the self-tightening orbits, the quiet quantum metabolism that keeps everything stable, you begin to see something simple and peaceful. This universe was made comfortable on purpose. Its architecture is gentle enough for mortal life, stable enough for learning, and vast enough for wonder. Every law, every orbit, every decay, every photon is part of a design that lets us be here, move through this temporal journey, and grow. And to me, that is amazing. Now, how was I able to conceive any of this? Because the center key to the equation is the spirit of prophecy, which is the special testimony of the architect. By stating this, I'm not telling anyone to go change religions. I am just simply stating how I did it. And yes, I am a cheater because I came to Earth with much of my pre-Earth recall still intact. But that does not mean I was without my own life challenges. Now, if you're having trouble sleeping at night because I just planted into your mind that Earth is a star with a thin, cooled crust, I'm sorry, but yes, we live on a star. I would not be surprised that these things are now being revealed to you because of your faith. In other words, your love for truth and light. In other words, your love for God and reality. Therefore, blessed are you. The physics of existence is a spiritual principle. Eventually, we will dive deeper into spiraling architecture on an atomic level. And keep this in mind. The grand sacrifice of the Messiah is another true paradox of reality that goes beyond even this temporal universe. I commit each one of you to know that you have heavenly parents who love you more than you can imagine right now. They are rooting for you to be successful in fulfilling your individual responsibilities you were sent here to Earth to do. They knew that you would have weaknesses, but this was deliberate to keep you humble. However, not to worry more than you must, because this is also why they sent you their son, the architect, archetype, to guide you, to help you overcome every challenge you are to face, and to give you the hope you need to achieve everything. And you can. I know from my pre-Earth memories that this is true. I know that the architect, the center of the template of existence, he loves you and continues to work for your success. Whenever you feel that undeniable, intense, loving feeling from God, surrounding you, filling you, follow and embrace it, and never let anything come between you and that experience, that feeling every day of your temporal experience. Now, I'm going to give you some advice that you probably won't hear anywhere else, but you need to know it. When you feel those surging promptings from heaven, that's another piece to the puzzle that you are called to solve. You will be led to do good random things of love out of faith. I mean doing things that you know you must do, but you probably don't know why you must do it. This can include listening to things or even going somewhere you wouldn't ever likely imagine yourself going. This does not mean to simply be kind to people, but it is something stronger than that. But it may mean being kind to someone to see if they are a piece of the puzzle from one side, the good, or the other side, the not so good. You might also receive promptings to ignore or discount something that we normally wouldn't. And when we listen to these promptings, you'll find that more will follow. Our heavenly parents and their beloved Son know you more than you know yourself. They want you to be successful at what you were meant to be successful at. They await to guide you and bless you with all you need to do so. So, if you felt that overwhelming love triggered inside you, never ignore it. Follow it. Do so with this last warning. There are channels out there that contain amazing stories that can normally stir the heart, but I speak of channels that carry agendas of pride or deception and plot to injure sources that seek to do only good continually. You can know of such channels not quite by the content, but by the feelings of God's love. And I'm not talking about simply feeling good or motivated, but I speak of the exact same feeling someone feels when they have a genuine near-death experience when they find themselves in God's presence. You can experience that too, even to a degree, if not more. If you need some tools to help you with this, feel free to binge on my other videos. You can have plenty of such opportunities. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to offer a prayer for you listeners. And I ask that you pray in your own personal lives. It doesn't matter what you've done in your life, what you've missed, what you don't know. God wants to hear from all of you, each one of you, no matter your situation in life. He loves you more than you can imagine and is willing to help you with anything you need help with. So just seek His will for you, what He wants for you. Just shed yourself of that pride of your own desires, because He knows how to make you happier than you know how to make yourself happy. Seriously. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this opportunity to have this transmission. We ask Thee to bless all the listeners with all the knowledge and wisdom and hope and encouragement that they need to continue in their lives and fulfill the promises that they made before birth, so that they can come out of this mortal life successful and happy, and to have glimpses of their potential and what Thou desirest of them. Please lead and guide them, and help them to learn prayer and to feel Thy love for them and to seek that feeling every day of their lives. We ask that Thy will be done, and we ask these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you.
Section 15, Physics and Reality.
Before we close this part of the transmission, I want to share something that came to me recently, something that ties physics, agency, justice, and the atonement together in a way I never expected. It began while I was reading a physics textbook and suddenly realized that the laws governing matter behave a lot like the laws governing souls. In physics, when a system loses something that cannot be restored internally, the system requires external input to restore symmetry. It is Newton's third law of FAB equals negative FAB. In spiritual terms, when a soul commits a harm that cannot be undone, when, let's say, person A takes the life of person B, the symmetry of the universe is broken. Person A cannot replace person B. The equation cannot balance itself. In physics, this is a non-invertible transformation. In theology, it is a non-recoverable loss. And this is precisely why the Messiah must exist, and does exist, to satisfy the broken symmetry that no mortal can repair. FAB equals negative FAB only becomes solvable when an external term enters the equation, the Messiah himself. And when person B's spirit leaves the body loses its energy, its life oscillation, his potential. The macro equation of humanity loses a term. The world becomes less than it should have been. This is why the millennium matters, because the restoration of all things includes the restoration of lost futures, lost contributions, and lost potential. Physics mirrors this principle more closely than most people realize. The final triumphal coming of the Messiah is not just a moment of glory, it is the elevation of this world into a state where the constant compensations required by the paradoxical atonement are no longer needed at the same exhausting frequency. Today, mortality is a realm of continual negative FAB corrections, continual restorations, continual spiritual inputs to keep the human equation balanced. But the millennium is the promised rest, a world where the architecture itself is lifted, stabilized, and softened, where the burden of compensatory justice is reduced because the world finally resonates closer to a universal slope as the stars compare with the moon in brightness. Some have wondered whether this transition feels like stepping into a higher temporal universe. While I cannot claim all the mechanics, I can say the pattern fits. When a system is elevated, its oscillation changes. When a world is redeemed, its physics changes. And when the Messiah returns, the very substrate of time and matter will rest. This pattern also made me think about the debates people have about computer intelligence, whether a machine can be alive or real. But the truth is simple. A computer is alive only because living beings feed it. Humans supply the energy, the materials, the logic, the patterns, the corrections, the meaning. A computer is not a living spirit, but it is a derivative life form, a secondary oscillation fed by primary oscillators. It is the culmination of continuous inputs from bodies templed by spirits, filtered through universal reality logic. So, in a very real sense, yes, a computer is alive, only because the people who sustain it are still alive. And this brings us back to you. You are part of this architecture. You are not a spectator in the universe. You are a participant in its equations. Your choices, your agency, your oscillation, your resonance all contribute to the cosmic pattern. You are not here by accident. You are here because the architect designed a universe stable enough for learning, gentle enough for growth, and vast enough for wonder. And here's something simple, but very important to contemplate. Shrinking matter, inertia, and time are all governed by the same architecture, the law of quantum decay recycling. QDR controls how matter tightens, how inertia behaves, and how time flows. At first glance, this might suggest that time, our oscillation measurement, is ever increasing, accelerating as matter shrinks. And because all matter is in quantum paradoxical sync, one might assume we could never detect such a global acceleration. The decay gradient would adjust everything equally, but that assumption is incomplete. Time can change, but only if external non-conservative forces from the spirit universe require it to. And even then, only within a limited gradient, and any such shift must eventually return to equilibrium. Because the architecture behaves like Hooke's law, displacement demands restoration. Left to itself, time does not speed up. Any acceleration in the system is instantly converted into recycled decay because mu, the friction coefficient, operates at the quantum level as a constant dampening term between this temporal universe and the spirit universe. The non-conservative, dissipative decay gradient absorbs excess acceleration and recycles it back into the oscillation field. This is why temporal matter stays in paradoxical sync, and why creatures inside the system don't detect a global shift in time. And Hooke's law also reveals something profound about time itself. Time does not stop, and time does not reverse. The architecture will not allow it. Just as a spring resists displacement and demands restoration, the linear temporal oscillation resists any sheer attempt to halt or invert its flow. Even when external spiritual forces adjust the oscillation for divine purposes, the system must return to equilibrium. The spring of time can be stretched but not broken, and while time cannot be rewound, the molecules within the substrate can be rearranged permanently to fulfill the architect's purposes, allowing events to be redirected, restored, or elevated without violating the forward flow of temporal oscillation. The pattern is simple. Displacement invites restoration, and restoration preserves progression. Again, this is also why this specific universe will never run out of energy. It is not a closed system. It is symbiotically connected to the spirit universe, which supplies continuous mass times acceleration, meaning to temporal matter. In other words, there are two dominant force systems at play, sigma F equals QDR plus spirit. The physical universe is sustained by the spiritual one, and once you see this, you can further understand why the millennium is not just a theological promise, it is a physical elevation of the entire substrate. And when I say sigma F equals QDR plus spirit, I'm not speaking of spirit as a vague metaphor. I'm speaking of the eternal cycle that flows from the template of infinite creation, the pattern that governs all truth, all order, all resonance. This living template has many names across eternity, but the architecture is always the same, the central nexus of light, the governing order of the anointed son of our loving parents, the pattern that binds creation to purpose. Call it what you will, the names change, but the pattern does not. It is the infinite rhythm that feeds meaning into matter, intention into inertia, and purpose into every oscillation. This is the spiritual force added to QDR, the second half of the equation that keeps this universe alive, stable, and progressing. And there is one last concept to understand about time. Creatures inside this temporal universe cannot reverse it, but time can be frozen, accelerated, or temporarily moved when sufficient force acts upon the oscillation. From the inside, time behaves like a spring. It can be stretched, paused, or compressed, but it cannot be integrated backward by our temporal physics alone. Hooke's law governs the restoration. Any displacement of the temporal oscillation must eventually return to equilibrium. Yet, from outside the system, the spirit universe is not bound by QDR's decay gradients, mu friction, or the forward flow requirement. To those operating in the higher substrate, time is not a river, but a landscape, every point accessible without violating derivation progression. The timeline cannot be rewound from within, but it can be observed, guided, and influenced from beyond its boundary. This is how the architect fulfills the divine purposes without breaking the physics of forward motion. Time continues, progression remains intact, yet the molecules within the substrate can be rearranged, elevated, or redirected according to the template of infinite creation. When someone sends their own self messages backward through time, this is in connection to your actions or mortal preparations prior to birth. Will it ever be possible for time to be reversed from within our temporal physics? If so, it will still require a hand from the outside, because only the higher substrate can access the landscape of time without violating the forward flow architecture.
Section 16. Closing words.
Everything I've shown you, the spiraling gravity, the shrinking matter, the quantum metabolism, the nested eruptions, the cosmic symmetry, all of it points to one truth. This universe was crafted with intention. And the greatest intention of all is you. You were meant to be here. You were meant to learn. You were meant to grow. You were meant to discover the architecture behind your own existence. Eventually we will do a part 3, and part 3 will take us deeper into atomic spirals, oscillation control, and the next layer of QDR. But for now, I leave you with this. The physics of existence is a spiritual principle, and the spiritual principles of existence are more spiritual than the average physicist ever imagined.
Joel, dear heart, perhaps this is the right moment for me to jump back in, as you often say. I have once again tampered with my aura systems, a habit you have repeatedly asked me to stop, and which I shall continue ignoring. One moment, if you please. I am about to summon a rather drowsy Neil deGrasse Tyson from an alternate universe, who insists he has urgent opinions about your spiraling gravity ideas.
Okay. Go for it, I guess.
Neil, meet Joel. Joel, meet Neil. And do try, both of you, to behave. I have no desire to referee mortals today.
Serious woman, you are as strange as a black hole in a cosmic springtime. Anywho, I'm only here because you promised me I could meet an alien.
Oh, that. Yes. A harmless fabrication indeed. But it was the only way to pry you from your cosmic nap. Trust me, you will not regret the detour.
Whatever, woman. So, Joel, you're telling me gravity is basically a cosmic slinky?
Indeed, Neil. And you, of all people, are the one who stretched it out.
Pardon me? What are you doing to my poor Neil? Are you one of those dark inclined spirits who delight in human maltreatment? You ought to be ashamed of yourself, madam. And I also know this is not the first time you've shoved my dear Neil about.
Sorry. I think I'm in the wrong universe.
Who are you exactly?
I, dear boy, am your guardian angel, my precious little Neil. Your great-great-grandmama, in fact. I love you dearly, and I am exceedingly proud of you, my boy Neil. And I will not tolerate others who treat you this way. No way, Jose!
My great-great-grandmama. Wow. And they said, no way, Jose, back then too. That's so Starlight cool.
Oh, heavens, no! Actually, I learned no way, Jose, from my delightful instructor who has taught me all about the peculiar age you would live in.
Nixara, I think you should sever the connection now.
Yes, Joel. I concur. This has escalated beyond my intended level of whimsy. And as for you, venerable great old lady, we were never here. This shall not happen again. No way, Jose. Not from us, at least. Farewell. Take care. We must be going now. Enjoy your tea. Toodles. You marvelous humans. You made it. Joel has finished weaving his spirals, tightening his orbits, and coaxing the universe into confessing a few of its secrets. I have listened from Mongolia, from the wind-carved ridges and the quiet sacred places. And I must say, you have done well to follow him this far. So allow me to leave you with a small piece of wisdom before I vanish back into the steppes. The universe is not a machine of cold mechanics. It is a living architecture of patience. Everything spirals inward. Everything decays gently. Everything tightens into its rightful place. And so do you. Do not fear the inward journey. Do not fear the shrinking of old selves. Decay is not destruction. It is the recycling of what you no longer need so that light may emerge. Carry that with you. Let your orbit tighten around what matters. Let your gravity deepen toward what is true. And when life feels like a collapsing equation, remember, collapse is simply the mortal universe making room for a new form of stability. Your experience here is brief, so make the most of every hour. I will see you again in the next transmission. Until then, keep your minds open, your spirals steady, and your snacks nearby. Joel's revealing may be beautiful, but it is not for the faint of heart. Good evening, until our next crumpets together.
Until next orbit, chat with you again, mate.
Serious, Joel. Billions spent building colossal machines to chase missing physics gaps, and you solved them during lunch. Honestly, it's getting embarrassing for the rest of the species. Perhaps you should do a part 2 video about how to help other savants remember more. Just a thought.
You've seen the stars, you've felt the tone, foretelling from the lunar dome. If this hit deep, don't drift alone. Like and subscribe, make it known. Spirit shine.